quickly. There we go. Everybody should get that pop up. So today we'll be running through our usual business and updates, approval of minutes, housekeeping, all the usual sort of stuff. And then we've got a publication update from Michael. Ruben will be bringing us the governance and operations manual updates from HL7. I think HL7 also sent out an email about that today, specifically around the eRequesting as well. And then Angus will be running us through R2 scope and the next steps for eReq. I will hand over to those participants as needed. So usual business, all of the minutes have been circulated electronically from our last meeting. I will put up a poll in a sec here for the approval of minutes, once I can find it. There we go. That should be with everybody.
We need to do a motion and a second on that.
Need to do a motion. I apologize.
I'm happy to motion that we accept those minutes.
Thank you. Your second?
I'll second them. Angus.
Angus, thank you, Angus. Going to relaunch the poll. It's been moved and seconded that we accept the minutes of the last meeting as circulated. Okie dokie. We'll close that off in 3, 2, 1. So for the minutes, approval of the previous meeting's minutes, 20 responses, 65% affirmative, 35% abstaining, no negative.
We might need the counts for the minutes.
Yep, sure thing.
1307, is that right?
1307, yeah, spot on. Okie dokie. Pending action items, we've got the Zulip group to support eRequesting implementers with Andy. Is Andy on the call today? I don't think I've seen his name.
No, I don't think Andy's coming today.
Okay, we'll defer that to the next meeting unless anybody else has an update on that for us. Nope, okie doke. With David Willick, we have seeking clarification and confirm whether the use of AU eRequesting is allowed by NPAC and to report back to the group. David, are you here? Do you have an update for us today?
Online, no update. Please leave it open. I should have an update when we get to Hobart.
Sure. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
And then there is the open scope for the R2 IG on the Confluence that is pending. We'll talk more about that a little bit later in the meeting as well. Sydney Connectathon is approaching relatively fast. 2-day event on the 11th and the 12th of March. I believe there's still tickets available. Links are up here on the screen. We can also pop them on the chat if anybody needs. So looks like somebody's beat me to that. Thank you, Michael. If you want to come, make sure that you get your tickets 2 days at Market Street in Sydney. I don't think we have a confirmed.
I'll just give an update. I think for that 10th of March, the work group day, there is a full day agenda for eRequesting work group on that day. So if you have a look at that page, it's in the link in the chat. It's got the agenda for that day of a work group day for eRequesting.
Nice and easy. Thank you very much. And are we still working through tracks for Connectathon? I can't remember what our last update was from chairs.
There will be an eRequesting track, definitely at the Connectathon. So I think the exact details are still being worked through, but yes, there will be a track.
Lovely. Anybody that can stop by, please do. Ballot sign up for the February ballot is here. We will put those links in the chat as well. We've got the AU patient summary R1 working standard that ends on the 13th of February. Ballot will run from the 20th of Feb to the 20th of March. Links are coming through in the chat now for sign up and those items. Please feel free to read through, vote, have your say. If you don't have your say, then it will be accepted as is, I believe. Ballot for working standard update. I believe that's with you, Michael.
I'll take over. I can share.
Cool.
Um, oh, I think you might need to approve my request to share.
Go. I'll turn mine off.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Hopefully you can see my screen. That'll good.
All coming through. Yeah.
All right. Got too many windows. Okay, still too many windows. Okay. So I'm very excited to announce that release 1 of eRequesting is now published. It got published last night. Package registry has been updated and the like, so we are live. Very exciting. So this link here is the permanent home. So this will always be valid, even when we have future releases of eRequesting. If you have eRec 100, I'll just click on that and I'll put it in the chat. That will always be there for version 1. If you take the 1 off it and you just have eRec, that's the current version, and you'll see our current version is version 1. Looking at the publication, so we have the current version, version 1, eRequesting 1 working standard release. And then we've got all our ones that led us to this. So very exciting day. Thought I might just quickly go through how we got here and what we did to give everyone a bit of a pat on the back as we went. So this was our timeline. This is where we got to. We started way back in January 2024. I think there may have actually been a meeting in December or something in 23. Might have been the initial sort of planning for it. But there have been meetings all through that time. We did a ballot for comment in the second half of 2024. We completed that in early 25. We then did a whole heap more development in that period from January through to July in 2025. And then we went into our ballot working standard, which is what we spent the second half of last year working through. And then we had a target of publication by the end of February, and here we are in early Feb with it published. So we're ahead of schedule, which is awesome. We had through that a number of connectathons, testing events, and the like. So a bit of a summary of what we had over that time. So for release 1, we had 59 Zoom calls. I think this makes 60 today, so 60 all up. We had 4 face-to-face meetings. On average there, we had about 45 attendances at each meeting. That's across face-to-face and Zoom calls, so that's pretty impressive. We had 1 Spark testing event in Brisbane. We had 5 HL7 Australia connectathons, and we went through our ballot for comment and ballot for working standard. I think all up on the left there, we've had sign up who have an interest in eRequesting. They're not coming to all the meetings, obviously, but over 300 organisations, 650 members who've signed up for the TDG. So yeah, we've had a lot of interest, which has been great. Our ballot for working standard, in the end, we ended up with a 93% approval status. So we had 42 affirmative, 3 remaining negatives. So that gave us the ability to publish, and that publication is now complete. So it's pretty nice to see this all done. Bit of a summary on what we did during the ballot for working standard reconciliation. So we had 99 ballot issues that were raised that we were working through. But we actually did more than that. We went through a whole heap of other issues that were just raised by IG authors and others in the community through these meetings. So we did above and beyond what was just raised during ballot. So we ended up with 124 issues that we resolved during the ballot period. You can see there the sort of breakup of the types of issues that we dealt with. There was sort of 27% change requests that were not substantive, sort of informative changes. We had 33% technical corrections, which are just minor technical corrections we made to the IG. We deferred 12%. We made no change, so they were not. We decided not to make changes. They were not issues we just decided needed fixing on 19%. We had a couple of duplicates, And then we had substantive change requests. They were actual normative changes to the IG. We only had 9 of those, at about 7%. And this is what we ended up with. So this is what's in release 1 as we've finalized it. We've got 4 actors and we've got 4 capability statements to go with those actors. We've got abstract profiles. So these are the base profiles that we're using to derive from for more specific resource profiles. We've got one for our communication request, diagnostic request, and task. We then had 5 obligation profiles that we brought in during ballot. So these are AU core profiles that we've just put obligations on for our eRequesting actors. So we haven't changed any constraints or anything on those. They're just straight AU core profiles, but we just applied the obligations. So for our filler, patient, placer, and server on what must support means in those profiles. Then we have all our meaty ones, the resource profiles. So there we've got document reference and communication requests, coverage, our imaging request, our pathology request, the consent for My Health Record, withdrawal, our tasks for workflow as well. And we had value sets to go with those for our terminology, and 7 of those that we brought in. And then a couple of extensions as well that we added for display sequence and fasting precondition on our diagnostic requests. So all up, I think that's a pretty good place where we've landed for release 1. We got a lot in there in the end. There was a lot of complexity in this. None of this was simple. So I think now we've got a great foundation for moving forward. And that's moving on now to look at release 2 on how we further refine this and extend it to meet additional use cases. So thank you, everyone. It's been a great effort to get here, and I think we've done a great job getting here. And now onward to the next.
Amazing. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone. Angus?
Yeah, I just had one question, Michael.
Yeah.
Sorry, could you share again
sure.
the actual standard, the celebrated release of the standard?
Yep. You actually want the IG itself?
Yeah, the IG, so HL7 All Fire eRec, the new home of it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So here, just in the yellow part, this page is part of the AU eRec, and it says version 100R1. And then if you click on the directive of published versions,
yes,
that's different to what I see.
I have seen a problem before. You need to do a hard refresh.
Refresh. You could have right. That would be it.
Because I had exactly the same problem. I panicked last night when I saw something. I was like, hang on.
You are dead right. You were dead. I was going to complain that top row, which is not there on my screen, but I just hit Control F5 and it suddenly appears. So
I had a minor heart attack on some. There was some other stuff too, some formatting in there, and I was like, oh no.
Okay, so if you constantly go to this page, it will be cached in your browser and it won't show it until it refresh your browser. Yep. Okay, thank you.
So that's great.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
And just stop share. There we go. You can share back now, Stuart.
Thank you. Alrighty, then we have Ruben will be providing us with a HL7 governance and operations manual update. Haven't seen Ruben's name. Ruben, are you on the call with us?
Yep. Hi. All right. Thanks, Stuart. And it's great to be here, especially at such an auspicious occasion. I didn't realize that the IG was finalized and published, and it was great to be here for that announcement. I guess on behalf of the HL7 Australia board, I'd like to also extend our thanks to everyone that's been involved in getting us to this point. It's a fantastic outcome. So also thanks to the co-chairs for inviting me to provide this update of the HL7 Australia Governance and Operations Manual. Many of you may be aware that Andy, Richard, and I, along with Brett, Naty, and Robbie, are working on implementation of the AU-GOM and provided a webinar on this a couple of weeks ago. I'm just here to provide a short update on where things are up to, and to answer any questions which may arise. So next slide, thank you. Right, so as I said, there was a webinar and there are links to this, which sort of outlines exactly what's happening at the moment. And part of that is the formation of an HL7 Australia Technical Steering Committee, and as well as a few new work groups. As part of that process, we have gone out with a call for nominations for the co-chairs and members of those different groups. We are seeking nominations for an AUTSC chair and deputy chair, two members representing the HL7 Australia technical community, four co-chairs for the fire work group, to replacing those with terms expiring. And the new work groups are UCOR, eRequesting, and a terminology work group, which have 7, 6, and 4 co-chairs respectively. Nominations are closing at 7 p.m. AEST on Monday, the 16th of February. If you are interested in nominating, please do get in touch or complete the forms available from the links in the call for nominations page, which is linked at the top of this slide. Next slide, thanks. Oh, we're missing a slide.
I'll share. There was a last minute update. Let me
No worries.
share it.
Let me turn this on. There we go.
I sent it to you this morning, Michael, so maybe
Yeah,
it
I
just
did.
didn't get in.
I did send it on, but I think still just missed it. So
Yeah,
all right.
no,
So
it's all
let me
good.
just. So that's that slide.
That's one.
Oh, hang on. Yeah, I can't get to the next slide.
I can try and.
There it is.
You got it? There we go. Thanks. So yeah, in terms of what that implementation team is working on right now, now that the call for nominations period is out, and as I said, we may have elections if we have more nominations than vacancies. We are also in parallel working on various administrative and technical infrastructure and documentation related tasks to prepare for the AU-GOM going live, hopefully on the 1st of April. That includes the obvious things like Zoom accounts, Confluence workspaces, and mailing lists, etc. I also wanted to flag that the Spark initiative has sent out a communique this morning, which provides some input into what this means for the Spark Fire Accelerator itself. I noticed that was sent out a little bit earlier today as well, so please have a look and get in touch if you haven't received that. And then finally, obviously with the technical design groups currently functioning, there will be some transition activities occurring between now and the 1st of April. And I just wanted to let everyone know that the HL7 Australia and CSIRO teams are working actively on those arrangements, including how mailing lists will be managed and various other things. There'll be more to communicate on that in due course, so look out for those. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ruben.
I have a question, Ruben.
Sure.
If I'm simply a participant who come to the eRequesting TDGs regularly, what will I have to do in order for this transition?
To be honest, we're not anticipating very much will change, except what you will find is that the structure under which those meetings happen will be under a new eRequesting work group rather than a subcommittee of the fire work group, which it currently is. Yeah, there might be some minor things like a new meeting Zoom call to dial into, or where you find the minutes for calls and things of that nature. But in terms of the discussions and how the standard continues to evolve and develop, we're not anticipating much change there.
Thanks.
All righty, doesn't seem to be any more questions. Thank you, Ruben.
Sure, thank you.
I keep sharing. Welcome.
Okey-dokey. I think the next one is just back to Angus for the AU eRequesting R2 scope.
Oh, you can probably share. Do you want to, Angus?
Yeah, I think I'll share.
Yeah.
Let's see if we need approvals.
I'll try hit the share button, see what happens.
Seems all good.
Good. Okay, so I'm going to start seeing we've done release 1. We are beginning to turn our heads to what would release 2 be and what is the scope of release 2. Nothing's locked in at all at the moment, and we're just starting to, we have some preconceived ideas, which you can see on this page here in this table. But of course, nothing is locked in, and even the details of any of these are still all up to work through in release 2 as we did release 1. But we're trying to at least have a discussion about what the community feels should be in release 2, and a bit of detail about those items. And we're more than open for other people to suggest things for release 2. This page here, which I will put a link in the chat. Find the chat.
I beat you to it.
Oh, you beat me to it. Have you put the link in? Thank you. So, you know, anyone's welcome to, you know, add to this table. We will also be, and partly this discussion is a prelude to the Sydney Connectathon. So on Tuesday, the 10th of March, before the Sydney Connectathon, we'll also be doing a live in a room discussion through Scope 2, similar to this, but all in person at the Connectathon. So this is a bit exposing the meeting sort of to that discussion, but if you're unable to attend. So I guess there is no particular order to this list, although I do feel it kind of is a little bit in the order of how some people think the priority is. And so it's not formal, but I think top of mind is this first row in at least co-chairs' minds. And that first thing is what's been renamed to fulfillment transfer. We had previously been talking using the term claiming here, but as per the last meeting, claiming is a very overloaded term. Starts making people think about Medicare claiming and billing, and really that's not what this is about. This is about an eRequest that has been placed, being transferred to the provider that's going to perform it. It may be an eRequest that's been allocated to one provider at the time of placement, but the patient chooses to go to a different provider, and this is the process of transferring that request from the original provider to that provider. It's also the notion that it can hop around. It could go, the patient might talk to one provider who brings the request over to inspect it, talk about it, but then the patient chooses to not go to that provider, goes to a third provider, fourth provider, fifth provider, and the request can keep following the patient as they go. So this is about a mechanism to achieve that, built on top of the Release 1 standard. For a bit of context, Magentis, Sonic, ACL are all live in production with a variant of transfer. They have been for a couple of months now. They're seeing healthy numbers of requests that are transferring between labs. Helios has also developed to the same model that Magenta, Sonic, and ACL have done, but have still got a little bit more work to do until they go live, but they're very close. So there is a preconceived notion in the industry of how transfer can work, but of course that hasn't been written into an Australian standard or into the requesting standard at all. So much like Release 1, where we had private industry a little bit ahead, we're the same here with this phase. So a bit of a description of how that works, or at least how it's working in the private at the moment. And of course, how we choose to put it in the Australian standard is completely up for debate as we do Release 2. Even whether this is part of Release 2 is up for debate, right? Maybe it's not. So the way that that's working in the wild at the moment is the barcode is, you know, typically a request is placed against a provider, let's say Helios, and the patient then chooses to go to another provider, say ACL. They present the barcode that is on their printed form or in a text message that they got from the provider. Barcode is scanned by the provider that the request wasn't originally targeted at. So, and they call a fire operation, which is a custom operation, which we'd have to define, which they have already defined a variant of it. You effectively pass the barcode value and your organization identifier, such as an HPIO, and you're basically asking that fire operation, I have a patient here with this barcode. I am Helios with this HPIO. I want the request to be transferred for me because the patient's standing here and wants to do it. The previous request tasks, so we have fire tasks that control the eRequest. Tasks are then that operation then cancels those tasks for, say, Helios. Helios is aware of that. They get updates and subscriptions, and so they are aware that their tasks have been cancelled. And then those tasks are effectively cloned and re-instigated for ACL. And then the call returns back to ACL with a success and tells them the reference to the group task identifier. And at that point, the operation's completed, and now ACL has it. It is transferred to them, and they have a reference to it, and then they go through what is their normal process of consuming that order. And this all happens in real time. So the previous provider is not aware of who or which other provider the patient went to. All they know is that it has been transferred to another provider, but they don't know who that is. New provider. So that's the basic way it works. There's lots of complications there about how do you know which eRequesting repository that request lives in. In the current live implementations, they have a very simplistic way of doing it, which is the barcodes have a prefix on them, which indicates, as do the previous barcodes from V2, the barcode has a prefix on it, which sort of indicates the placing organization. So Magentus have GTU, they have GEN for Gen2 and Genie. Best practice has BP, medical director has MED. So that prefix on the barcode is a fairly dumb way of providers going, oh, it's a GTU barcode, therefore it will be in the Magentus fire server. If it was a MD prefix, then I presume it's in the Telstra Health one. And so they have pre-organized arrangements that they know about this repository, they know about that repository, they already have authentication to access those repositories because they get orders from them. And so then simply the barcode prefix goes, oh, it's in that one or it's in that one. Of course, there are far better ways to do that, but that is another whole piece of scope and probably needs engagement with governments like service locator patterns and stuff in order to improve it. Or perhaps we have to change the barcodes across the industry entirely. So it's not just a barcode, it's like a URL web address in the barcode. But that is a big change for industry and maybe a stretch too far for release 2. But certainly there are better ways to do that. Some considerations. So once a task is in progress, so once a task is collected or the image is acquired, then that task via eRequest can't be claimed by another provider. So if the patient actually goes to Helios, they go through with it, they get the needle in their arm, or they provide a specimen, and Helios then updates the task status to say in progress, collected, and then the patient somehow took that form to the competitor, to ACL, and scanned it, and they tried to call the operation would deny the transfer. It'd say, this is already collected at another provider, you can't transfer it, right? At least that's how it's operating with those providers at the moment. We described the previous tasks are cancelled. Where was I? How the request can be transferred. This notion of it being transferred many times. So this is the patient goes to ACL, not Helios. They go into the collection room. The task has been transferred, but it hasn't been collected yet. So Helios has it. It's now focused on Helios, but they haven't collected. You pull out the needle, the patient faints, and then they leave. And so you haven't collected it. The patient, a few days later, doesn't want to see the needle at Helios, so they go back to ACL. The same process happens. ACL scans the barcode, they transfer it back to themselves and try and put the needle in the patient over here. And that can repeat over and over. So the request can move, but as soon as it's collected or image acquisition in radiology, then that's locks it for no more transfer, at least in what's happening today. We get to decide in the Australian standard how this works, but I'm just describing how they're doing it today. We looking forward, especially for radiology, we envision some sort of mode like a peak mode. So there's this notion of transferring it all the time, but we can foresee there's a more efficient way to just say a provider could just peek at it. So the patient gives the barcode, and instead of transferring it to themselves, they kind of just look at it. I just want to look at the request, read only, to decide, because they might be on the phone with the patient talking about the cost of the MRI, but they need to know the clinical history. So the patient can read out the barcode, they can peek at the request, read the clinical history, talk to the patient about it. The patient might go, nope, I'm not going to do it. That sounds all too expensive. And they leave and nothing's changed, right? So we can envision that would be very useful in the future. So discussions about that. The current guys aren't doing that. There's no peak in what they're using in production at the moment. I think this moving into transfer is where it becomes really critical that everyone follows the standard. Because at the moment, you can kind of live in your own bubble because you're getting your own requests and you've implemented to that and you're just doing your own thing. As soon as transfer comes into play, you suddenly realize that the way I do it has to be the same as my competitors. Otherwise, it all just falls down. So if anything, transfer is that really good milestone that eventually locks in true interoperability, because it literally has to transfer between different providers. And if they're not doing it the same, it won't work properly and they'll have to adjust to do it the same. So I think for me, transfer is the thing that really locks in true interoperability, and really means the providers have to apply to the standard and not do some custom other thing that was convenient. Need to negotiate. The second item on this table here was split fulfillment, but it is mentioned in the fulfillment transfer. So I think I'll leave that till we get to that row. But this is just the idea of splitting requests, right? Probably a strong use case in radiology. The doctor's ordered MRI and X-ray. The patient rings up someone and says, I want to do the MRI here because you're the cheapest. But they go, oh, but we don't do the X-ray. And so this idea that a provider can claim one of the exams, but not the other, and then the other can be claimed somewhere else. That's on the table to investigate that idea of split fulfillment. The other concept is SNOMED catalogs. So we've talked a lot about unifying the order catalogs onto SNOMED. The transfer really brings this into light, right? So today, again, it's fine to have your own custom codes because you're just getting your orders. But the day that the order can now move from Helios to ACL to Sonic or across the radiology providers, that's where having consistent SNOMED codified order catalog items really comes into shine. It means you don't have to manually code that thing that you get from Helios because you don't understand Helios' codes. I've stated quite often that what really matters here is frequency. The catalogs are very large. They're getting to right down to codifying weird and wonderful tests is always going to be difficult, but there's huge value in your top most frequent tests. So we've thrown around the 80% of your work is the top 100 tests. So encourage people to focus on the most common things. In pathology, full blood count is a huge percentage of the workload. If you just SNOMED codified that one test, you would knock off something like 10% of the workload. So this transfer really leans into that and it's a real chicken and the egg, right? Like if if I SNOMED codify mine, it makes it seamless for my competitor to consume it, but vice versa. If my competitor SNOMED codifies, then it makes it seamless for me to do it. So it's a win-win for everyone to SNOMED codify their stuff. And transfer really brings it into light. I'll move off transfer. I'll open up if anyone's got any questions before I move on to the next scope item, but that was a sort of summary of what transfer is.
Angus, did you want to maybe add the peak operation to the rows somewhere? Is that, I see that as being a different operation to fulfillment transfer or split fulfillment or booking, or is it part of booking? You don't have to do it now.
Yeah, I'll do it just. Oh, don't forget. I'll do it later. But yeah, I don't disagree. I think just as I think split, like see, split is mentioned here, but we already split it out into its own one, right? So, but I agree that peak, which is not in here, is, yeah, it's part of booking. So I think it should be split out into its own thing because booking wants peak, but it's part of transfer as well. So yep, I agree with that, Michael. We should split peak out to its own one. If there's no other comments, I'll move on to split fulfillment, which we touched on a second ago. So this is we summarized it. So this is where you can split a request into two parts. As the example I gave, an MRI and an X-ray. The provider might want to do the MRI, or the patient wants to do the MRI here, but they don't want to do the X-ray here. So this notion of splitting it into two, that's quite complicated, and working through that will be a challenge. But there's certainly a demand for that. Magentis is seeing that from radiology providers are wanting that ability. So whether to put that into release 2 scope and start chewing away on it is certainly high on the agenda. I'll move on to booking. So booking, the concept I think being thrown around about booking here is not a full booking system, right? It is more about the provider providing read-only information into the order about a booking. So we're not going to manage like slots and which rooms are taken and which rooms aren't taken and can we fit the patient in here, and the actual booking process is not really what we're proposing here. That's embedded into many radiology systems, and they have their own ways of doing it, and it's quite complex. But what we're more talking about is when a booking is made against an eRequest, providing that information into the eRequest for the requesting practitioner to observe, right? So now we would get not just that the eRequest has been booked, but it has been booked for Tuesday, 10 o'clock on March the 5th or something. So now the doctor not only knows it's booked, but he knows when it's booked. So if he's like eager to, worried about getting the result for this patient or the report for this patient, it's comforting to know the patient's been and they've booked, but it's even more insight to go, oh, and they're booked for a month from now. I don't need to think about it until a month from now. So just getting the information about the booking into the eRequest. And of course, that booking's cancelled, it would have to be removed, and that sort of notion. So as it says here, we're thinking about attaching that to the task, and it would be just metadata following the task round. So now not just booked, but when it was booked. Any questions on that one? I'll move on.
There's a couple of questions in the chat.
Yep. Chat. Let's check. Windows open. I'm struggling to find the window with the chat. Can't read it out, can you, Michael? Chat, here we go.
You find it?
Yep. Thanks for dropping out. Sorry if I'm dropping out. I might turn fan off because maybe that's not helping. Will all the info own the pathology request? Will all info on the pathology request form be transferred, e.g., if the requesting health provider has noted that the patient has a difficult venous access? Yes, all the electronic. So certainly when we transfer the eRequest, the entire electronic payload that was given to one provider will be given to the other provider. The only thing that won't be there is evidence of which provider had it beforehand. But the clinical notes, all the clinical stuff will go across. I think as far as we see it, the only thing they wouldn't get is which provider had this before me. So that's a yes to that question as far as I see it. The actual request won't get physically transferred. It remains where it is on the AU-GOM server, but task owner would change. That's correct. Just back on the other question, the form. So the electronic data will transfer. The form is presumably coming because we're scanning a barcode, but there's many there are more than one, tends to be more than one instance of the physical form. There's possibly the one the doctor printed. There's the one that may be sent by the lab, which is a text message, which all of them should have the ability, and as far as I've seen, they do, to click a link and you open up a PDF rendition of the form. But of course, we always live in the paper electronic world where there is the problem that if the practitioner printed the form and then decided to get a pen and write things on that paper form, then of course that's not in the electronic order. And whether that written form comes to the provider, yeah, we'd like to hope it does, but of course there's the text message and the PDF that's built off the electronic data, and that won't have the writing on it. So there is those complications. And I guess this is something that physicians would need to be well aware of, that if you are going to get a pen and start writing on the form, that's on that form and only that form. It'd be much better to be writing that in the clinical notes in your clinical system before you hit send. It's hard to work around that problem.
Angus, my comment was more from the other end. If the, say, Sonic or ACL had a difficult collect, they can't share that information back into the system, can they?
Right. We haven't got a mechanism for that today. Yeah, so the providers who are consuming the request today really only update, they can view the entire request and they can update the statuses of the task, like move it into collect it. They can write, although it's not really sort of what we're suggesting here, when they update a status, they can have a status reason text, but it's more about technical error scenarios where I'm rejecting this request because no patient family name, given name or date of birth was provided, which would be a technical issue, right? It's to update the request to not, to just give a status reason of patient was difficult to bleed potentially, but it's not really the use case. So my answer at the moment is no, we don't have that mechanism, and maybe that's something to discuss as part of transfer. One provider be able to give information to the next that claims it. So it's a good point. And they're not doing that today in production systems. Collection notes is an interesting one, very permanent to currently not in scope. Right.
Yeah, that was just I just preempted that reading that one.
Yeah. So this is challenging because we sort of treat clinical notes as from the placer. We're kind of now talking about fillers clinical notes, if you will. So I agree. It's a good topic to bring up as part of request transfer, I think. Splitting is complicated by the fact that the order in which the trays are done may be fixed. An X-ray is needed to check for metallic objects before an MRI. Otherwise, severe injury from metallic objects could happen with the MRI. Splitting is complicated by the fact that the order in which the so fully aware of the metallic object issue. To me, this is clinical notes. It's actually, if we look in this list right down the bottom here, this implanted medical device touches on this point. So with our new model for clinical notes, which is part of the Release 1 standard, you are able or systems, the clinical systems, are able to put a note on one exam and not on another, right? So you can associate, or you can put it across them all, right? It's the model we've put into release 1. So you could say on the MRI exam, patient has a medical implant, warning, warning, but not have that note on the X-ray, or you could choose to put that note across both, right? In either case, it obviously needs to be split with them. So the global note would go across to both splits, and the note that's specifically on one exam would live with that exam as the split. At least that's how I see it. But it is a good point. You obviously wouldn't. You would tend not to write that note on the X-ray when it's really relevant for the MRI. That could be a risk. That if you say something that's relevant to the MRI, but you say it on the X-ray, and then it's split, then that lives the X-ray, not the MRI. So it's certainly challenges we need to talk through with. This would also need to be embedded into the placing system, right? Today, placing systems tend to just have one clinical note box for the whole thing. So I think maybe the point here is that as we talk about splitting, we need to consider how clinical notes are captured and how they're split. That's a good point. I'll move on to, I think we covered booking. I'll move on to specimen. So specimen is about, we talked a couple of meetings ago, Vince certainly raised specimen and made some very good points about some, at least in pathology, and some exams need to be qualified by their specimen in order to know what they are. An example might be swab. So in our RCPA catalogue, I will admit I haven't gone and checked whether this is true, but Vince telling us it's in there in different variants, and I believe him. There may be an exam type of swab, but that means very little to in the end. It's like, is it an eye swab? Is it an ear swab? Is it a swab from all sorts of swabs? So having the information about the specimen certainly qualifies the type. It's not just a swab, it's a left ear swab, because that's what the sample is. We talked about this can get very complicated when the laboratory has a preset catalog of particular samples for particular tests. Certainly in hospital systems, which are very closed systems where they're sort of integrated to one pathology provider, that ordering system is all very tightly coupled in that when you order this test, we will be collecting this sample, and collection rounds are created, and collection nurses are told to collect this sample because of this test. So in that world, collection staff are more leaning into, I'm told to collect this tube, rather than I'm told to collect the required tubes or samples for this test. So it's a very complicated world if we're nationally going to agree on what samples are for what tests. I feel, and this is all to be talked about if this is in scope, I feel specimen would more be about the placer system telling you their reality. Like the doctor is telling us he's taken an eye swab for this swab test. Whether the lab actually wants that for that test is kind of out of the picture. If we talk in tubes, this might be a creatinine, and he's given a urine sample. So we want creatinine on urine, not on blood. But yeah, I'm just highlighting that the complexities of labs' requirements for samples against certain tests is a very complicated world to interoperate nationally. But certainly the idea of recording what the doctor has done is very useful. So, the doctor has bled this tube to do that test. To sort of highlight what I mean there, a doctor, he would be silly to, but he might request a full blood count on a feces. Now that's ludicrous, but I'm just highlighting the lab has a view of what tests, what tubes they require for what tests, and I think that's somewhat independent to what the doctor actually does. So this would be recording what samples the doctor's recorded. Very useful when it's a doctor collect. So the doctor's collected sample in his room, or it's a self-collect. The patient's collected sample at home and is received at the collection center of the laboratory provider, and they can record what they've received. There's this other step, which is what the lab is actually going to do, what sample they're going to do what tests on, which in my view comes afterwards. All those complications need to be worked through. So specimen, that's a sort of summary of what specimen's about. Let's go back to questions along the same lines. What we do about potential of finding a device not known in an MRI, not known if MRI compatible on Scout per MRI, for example. On the same lines, what do we do about the potential of finding a device not known if MRI compatible? So we're certainly, as per this bottom item, we have on the table to start putting implanted device information into eRequests. There's also clinical notes where doctors can write whatever they like to warn the imaging provider of possible risks. I'm not quite sure.
Angus, just to clarify, sorry, thank you. It's more to do with, for example, there's a lot of people from 30 years ago that had a shunt implant. They come in, they can't tell you the history. The first time you find is on the Scout. They do a Scout X-ray before they do an MRI, as you know. So basically, if that happens and they find it, what is the mechanism to deal with that then? And then there was a follow-up by Nick question that relates to the same sort of pre-MRI screening that is being done. How do we deal with that? A lot of the time, I can be honest with you, GPs that just simply don't know, perhaps because they weren't that patient GP from 30 years ago, and that's just a simple reason.
I have personal experience this morning. I booked an MRI this morning, and I could think, well, I had an Achilles operation a few years ago, and they probably put some pins in there. Are they metal? I don't know. Similar sort of scenario. I'm not sure. Like, I can certainly see at the time of ordering the patient, it kind of today would fall into clinical notes. Like the patient's telling the doctor, 10 years ago I had this operation. I don't know whether I have metal in me or not. That getting into clinical notes. Beyond that, I feel like we're as workflow today, right? The order for an MRI has come to the imaging provider. The order can't tell you the patient's conditions. Like what you do today, I don't see how that really changes. If you need to do a Scout X-ray or to find something, that doesn't change. The order's not going to know. The order only knows what the doctor can tell you and what the patient can tell the doctor.
But then how do you upload that back into the feedback if they either, one, don't action it as a result of, let's say you did have pins that were put, you didn't know about them, the doctor didn't know about them, they found out, they didn't proceed with the MRI, and then what happens, in that scenario?
Okay. So it's almost back to what Michael was saying about the providers being able to inject clinical information on the transfer. Yeah, I think you're just further nailing down that there's a good requirement that I think we need to add it to the list, right?
Agreed.
There's probably a good case that providers need to be able to enhance the request with what they know from their interaction with the patient.
Totally agree.
Very good point. I'll go, Mandy, you've got your hand up. And now it's down. There you are.
In the clinical practice, all is good if the doctor puts in the details, but usually the doctor just provides the order. It becomes to the other healthcare staff, or if it's a private request, the patient to fill in the request or the criteria eligibility in the form. So just wanted to highlight that. And if that is the case, then there should be a link to the referral or the request criteria included. So would this complicate your process?
Yeah, so we have really a model that we have today from release 1, like the elements that exist in an eRequest as per the Australian standard that was finalised today and that we can further improve with release 2. There is always more information that every provider wants, right? So there's even the notion that, if you're coming to my provider, I want you to fill in this form, right? We haven't really got to that ability yet. like certainly not in a custom sense. You know, like you've chosen this provider wants you to fill in this form. That we haven't got that in scope yet. It's certainly something you could propose for release 2. It does get very complicated. Like, you know, we have to then integrate many different providers' wishes and wants and forms that they want to be presented. Pathology has similar sort of use cases. You've ordered this test. We want to ask you more questions so that we can bill for a higher Medicare item, you know, things like that. But we certainly don't have that in scope at the moment, and that sort of falls into what has been done in the past. You know, if you go to this provider, they can scan the eRequest. It comes up with the bare bones, what is being asked for, and then they ask the patient to fill in some form. And again, like if they fill the form in at this guy and then decide not to go forward with it, are we transferring that form along with the request to the second provider? To be honest, I think it's a reach a bit far, but certainly it can be proposed, right?
Okay, so the requests for MRI are very, very clear. If you want to do a scan with a contrast, the requirements of the risk are literally straightforward. Now, I would really feel the pain if people then come back and then you need to adjust and it comes down as a bit of a nightmare in reorganizing. So, knowing from the clinical background, I feel it might be a good idea to leave the request with the GP. However, when it comes down, it needs to have a section where either the GP can fill that in or it can handball it to the pathology or the radiology or whatever the area is to complete. And these information then can be populated so they don't have to ask the same questions again and again and again. So it'll be kind of in the system. Is this something that could help, like creating a secondary area for additional information? Would this help reduce complication?
I think it's, again, touching on the point we've just touched on twice before. The notion of the provider, the pathology provider, imaging provider, being able to push back into the request clinical information. I think it's, you know, that everyone would be able to set. So if you go to, let's say you go to Helios, they discuss what they want to do with you, they record some information about that, but then you don't go through it. Helios can push that information into the request. They're now, you know, the patient doesn't want to do it with them, but at least the next provider can see it, and the placing system would be able to see
Perfect.
that. So,
Perfect.
So I think that's part of this conversation. It's something we haven't got at the moment, but I think this is becoming clear that part of transfer is being able to transfer information post the request being placed from the providers that is visible to the provider it eventually arrives at, but also visible to the placer. I think it's becoming clear that that's a key point. So I will get that into, I think, under fulfillment transfer, this requirement. Go back to the questions. This issue could be generalized. Tests. Nick, this issue could be generalized to conditional test sequence in general, MRI safety screening not confirmed to medical device implants, other foreign bodies, shrapnel. I think it's the same thing. We've yell out, Nick, if we haven't covered it already. Agree, same. Nick put out there, do we have a mechanism currently? I think it's the same thing. Imaging requests using terms from the radiology request. Imaging requests using terms from the radiology request set should be easily mapped to SNOMED. Am I right in thinking the issue is where a local code set term gets translated into a RS term at the referrer's EMR or elsewhere? So we have two different, so this is about the order catalogs and standardized order catalogs, right? We have sort of two-speed economy between pathology and imaging at the moment in its progression towards a standardized order catalog. So pathology, still everyone has their own catalog, and we have a catalog produced by the RCPA, which has SNOMED mappings in it. In the radiology world, similar pattern, but they're a bit further back in that everyone's got their own catalogs, and even some of those providers don't have catalogs per se. They kind of just accept free text. That's quite common in imaging, but certainly Ranscar's working towards a common catalog. I don't want to burst their bubble, but pathology has had a common catalog for over a decade, and still we haven't had adoption natively of that catalog. And I don't see a future where that will occur, at least not in pathology. What is more practical is they all have their own catalogs and they map their catalogs to SNOMED in the most frequent tests. The RCPA catalog, even though it's wonderful and is a fantastic piece of work, the breadth required and the change management to implement a new catalog into an existing pathology provider is very large. And a more practical approach is everyone maps to SNOMED. So Healius has their local code for full blood count, so does Sonic, so does ACL, but all of them associate the same SNOMED code to that code, and that is sent with the order. So now, when I get the order, which was originally a Healius order and I'm at ACL, I can see Healius's local code, but under it, I can see the SNOMED code full blood count, and I know what that means. That way, it incrementally can be improved. More things can be mapped to SNOMED over time, more and more. But in my honest opinion, you'll never get to the end. It's a long, long tail, but you will get closer and closer to the 80% of the volume you do, because 80% of the volume you do is 100 tests. So you map 100 and you're effectively there, but there's over 800 tests in their catalog and you'll never get to the end of it. I did that story to radiology because I think radiology, whilst it's early days for them and they aspire to a single order catalog, and maybe they can do that, they're going to run into the similar issues. So there's still a lot to be done in the common order catalog space. All I'm saying is transfer really brings it into sight. Without transferring requests around, you just live in your own bubble. Doesn't matter that you got your own codes. But as soon as you transfer, the problem becomes clear as day, because you're getting other people's requests. Correct. Thank you, I agree. Make strong argument to letting providers do it. Yep, it's the clinical note thing we discussed. Additional supporting information for specific tests should be an item in R2 scope. Agree. Date, time, the last dose of digoxin or tegretol. I don't know how to say that. Agree. I think we've nailed this idea. It's been a great point that we've come at, that injecting for further clinical information into the order post it being placed is a high agenda thing to do. Have another meeting now. I have to go. Yeah. Okay. So I will move on to we did specimen bundle profiles. So this scope item is about providing some. There's quite a technical thing. In R1, we had a lot of rules about how the API works and what the data model looks like, but we didn't really walk too heavily into how do you submit that set of resources into a FHIR server in a known way. We purposely didn't, because we wanted that there's many, many ways you could do it, and we didn't want to, I don't think we could, just prescribe one way that was going to work for everyone. It was still too early. But release 2, now we have many vendors sort of doing it. Possibly we can start articulating, maybe not mandating, but providing examples in the spec of here's a way to do it, in order to lead people into doing it the same way. Certainly my experience, having moved from Sonic to Telstra Health, this has become quite obvious, because even though both were trying to do the Australian standard, this looseness about exactly how you commit the bundle and also retrieve the bundle meant that the way Sonic ACL were doing it is slightly different to the way Telstra Health was doing it, and that causes implementation problems, primarily because of authentication, like how you control what they're allowed to see is a little bit interweaves with how they do it. And so it's becoming clear that by not prescribing how to do it, that's making interoperability more difficult. So providing example bundles is a step in the right direction to starting to corral people into doing it one way. this is all, and I would add that's not just the bundle going in, but also the providers querying to get the stuff out, trying to provide some advice and guidance as to, you could query this way, it would work. And that, if people got problems with that, they can talk to us about, like, why doesn't that work? And eventually we get to a point that we can, maybe in R3 or 4, actually lock down that this is the way you query to get stuff out, potentially. So that's bundle profiles. Right, so the last 3 are coming from eRequesting, and they're really about this supporting information, extra clinical information. So a summary, or so we're down here, a summary or overview of clinical assessments that identify the potential for harmful or undesirable physiological reaction unique to the individual or associated with the exposure to a specific substance. In my mind, you know, this simple one is maybe latex allergy, right? And the nurse is going to use latex gloves. So definitely eRec has been looking into this, providing atomic structured data that we can put into the eRequest about allergies. So that's been hanging around since release 1, and it's certainly been considered for release 2. And the next 2 are much the same. So the next one is a summary or overview of a single health condition, injury, disability, or any other issue that impacts the physical, mental, or social well-being of the individual. I'll just highlight that these things are structured forms of clinical notes. We always have this big text box where the doctor can write an essay, say whatever he likes, and that goes across. We have that today. But there are many elements which people deem of high value, and which providing structured information can facilitate further improvements in the workflow downstream. Pregnancy status is the one that we struggled with last time, but kind of got in. Like, we don't just want to sort of leave it to the doctor to, in clinical notes, say something like, we kind of want a question asked of the doctor about pregnancy. And these are the similar sort of elements. It's about, you know, corralling into, we really would like to know specifically this piece of information, and we're going to pass it along in the order. If anything, it's more a prompt than it is just allowing a text box to write whatever they like. I'd highlight that these things affect both ends, right? Like, if we have these things, we're going to ask doctors up front these questions, right? Because there's no way we're going to get that data unless we ask those questions. So putting these things in means doctors in the long run are going to get their systems asking them to populate these things. And furthermore, labs are now, and imaging providers are going to get this stuff. So it means if you get it atomically, you can drive workflows. So certainly the implant device one, right? If we know we're going to get this in a structured way, we can build systems at the other end that puts up flashing lights, warnings, errors, you know, be aware there's implanted device information for this patient, right? We can't do that with clinical notes. If you write in clinical notes, this patient has an implant, it takes a human on the other end to read that, understand that, and be alert. But if we get it in a structured way, our systems at the other end can put up a big red banner and alert you. And that, but it's an impost at the front to get the value at the end. So there's, you know, being aware of those 2 things. And that's true for these all 3 of these. So personally, I feel that these things really need input from both sides, right? It's fine for the reporting doctor to say, oh, it's really important I say these things, but there kind of needs to be agreement in the back end as to why do we need these things? And we align on the 2, not just we're going to tell you everything, and this side's like, I don't know why you're telling us, we don't know what we're going to do with it. It needs agreement between both, in my view. I'll go back to questions. The GP may or may not know that the test requires the patient to be fasting. This tends to be covered when the patient makes the appointment with the imaging pathology for the test, but could require adjustment of patient medication, which might be self-managed or might require a further GP doctor consult. How does the doctor add to the previous test request with further info, causations, etc.? So I will highlight, we already have a fasting status indicator in the request as per release 1. It's not a flag that says the patient is fasting. It's a flag from the doctor that he has advised the patient to fast. And then when the patient arrived at, say, pathology, where it's more important about fasting, because of that flag, they would ask the patient, "Have you been fasting?" There's a transfer between the request coming into the lab and then putting it into their laboratory system. What comes in is we advise the patient to fast, and what the collection staff putting it into the laboratory system do is reaffirm, did you fast? And so just highlighting that transition there. I'm not sure if that's quite, Tony, have I covered what you're talking about here? Or are you talking about the fasting status going back to the placer once it's known by the lab? Maybe that's what you mean. And if that's the case, then that falls into this topic we've touched on many times now about being able to inject clinical information back into the order to go back the other way. Hope that covers that. I will flick, I probably should have shown you at this beginning, this breakout exploring claiming, these links are all going the same place. But if you click this link, it takes you to this page. This was discussion that happened in September, but it's very much the same stuff that we've just been going through. Claiming, why do we need it? Magenta's approach to claiming today. Use of SNOMED codes that we've covered a lot of. Booking discussions that we've covered. Group considerations. This is really about split fulfillment and the peak view that we've talked about. And there's the link Michael's was put in there. So this was a previous conversation at a Connectathon. We're having a conversation now in this group, and then come the next Connectathon, we're going to really repeat this. But we're hoping at the next Connectathon to get down to, our top R2 scope items. So I implore you to put more information here. Certainly from this discussion, I will update some of these. I will split the, as Michael suggested, split out the
peak.
The peak, split the peak out into its own row. And I think I'll add commentary. Actually, I might even split into its own row this concept of, what should we call it? Provider created clinical context for transfer. We're way early, aren't we, Michael?
That's all right. I think down the bottom of the page here too is just the items that were deferred from release 1. So they were all things that were raised during ballot from release 1. So they're all things that we triaged and decided they're good ideas. They're things we definitely need to talk about, but they weren't things that we were able to do in release 1 because we wanted to make sure we could deliver an initial step. But it's definitely worth having a look at all of these, and any that of any interest, just add them to the table above. So these Confluence pages can be edited by anyone. These aren't just for co-chairs. These are discussion pages open to everyone. So if you have any comments on any of these, if you think, oh yeah, we really need to address one of these items that we deferred in R2, put it in the table above for discussion. And then down the bottom, I think these are just the current open JIRAs for eRequesting as well. So that's where you can raise an issue on the spec. There's a open an issue at the bottom of the spec page, and they'll pop in here. So these are things that we should go through as well to sort of say, okay, some of these will be sort of implementation issues. I know Andy's put a few in here that as he's trying to implement R1, he's finding a few things that are making it difficult to implement. So they might not be new scope. They might be changes to things that we've put in there to make it more usable. So yeah, these are all things that are sort of should be thought about, as well as any new issues. Anything new anyone's thinking about, just add to the list in the table above. Like I think Angus said, everything's up for grabs at the moment. This is not a definitive list. The point of what is happening now is to refine this to determine what should be in release 2.
And certainly if you can't make it to the Connectathon, and you've got something burning thing, definitely get into this list, because if it's in this list, it's going to be discussed in that room at Connectathon. But if it's not in this list, it may not be discussed. I don't think I've got much more to cover for scope, Michael, unless you can think anything.
No, I think that's fair. I think you went through a lot today. Well, that was really good. But Stuart, did you want to move on? I think it's probably just some discussions about the next meetings, given there's some conflicts.
Yeah, that's all I've got left on the slides here. I'll put them up so everyone can see. As Michael suggested, we do have some conflicts for the next couple of meetings, so there'll be an update to the schedule. Starting with the next one will be the 25th and the 26th of February, but it'll be at the Community Co-Design Workshops in Hobart. That will be the next time everyone will be together. It won't be on this telecon. It will be in person at Hobart. I don't think there is a specific eRequesting track, though, is there?
No, there's no eRequesting at that Hobart event, but it does conflict. A lot of people will be at that event that would normally come to eRequesting as well.
So any discussions, grab Michael while he's around and keep him busy for the day. After that, we have our Sydney work group meeting and our Connectathon. Work group is on the 10th of March. The Connectathon is the 11th and 12th. As we said at the start of the meeting, there will be discussion on eRequesting on the 10th, and there is a track for eRequesting at the Connectathon itself. That cancels the standard telecon on the 12th of March, and it will be in person over those 3 days as well. And then I think we're back to regular programming for the 26th of March with our telecon Zoom calls for eRequesting. I think that's all we've got for the day. Everybody can have 10 minutes back for, I think, the second time in eRex history, unless there's any last-minute questions.
Thanks, Stuart.
No. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Angus.
Thanks,
Bye, guys.
Ryan.
Bye.